Well, good morning. Certainly glad to see each one here this morning. So glad that you've come our way, especially if you are visiting. We are always encouraged to have our visitors and ask if you'd remain after services briefly so we can at least introduce ourselves to you and get to know you just a little bit better. It's also cause for some celebrations this weekend. First and foremost, it's Dwayne's birthday today, so if you didn't have an opportunity before class or in the interim, you can wish Dwayne a happy birthday. Also, Bill and Frances Weger celebrating their 74th wedding anniversary today. That was in the paper, and his sister Flo is with us, so you may want to tell Flo about that. I know that she was very glad of that accomplishment as well. And then this weekend, we have marked as just remembering the 60th year of this work here at University. Starting out with the many groups that have branched out from 6th and Arlington, as you know, the history that comes through that, and had sent some members over here from 8th and Lee, and about 30 people from 8th and Lee, and some from Northwest, some from 6th and Arlington, to establish this congregation as an area congregation to reach out within its area. Here, 27th and Cornell, as it started out to be, and as we said in the bulletin, I put those out as the college church, and then also to eventually to University Church, which many of you have been coming for quite some time. So with that, tonight I've asked Weldon to fill in for the pulpit. Who better to talk about 60 of those years when he has served so many of them that he can recount. And we're so glad to have him still serve with us, even after retirement, to be in this congregation. So with that, he is going to present the lesson this evening. And then also, afterwards, and carrying from those of you who remember the tradition, one of our former elders who had passed on, Bill Prock, used to have kind of an ice cream get-together in the summer months one time at his house. And so I thought we would just kind of continue with that just for the 60th. So if you want to bring either homemade ice cream, if that still exists. Some people said, people still do that? I said, but Bluebell and Brahms are just fine with me because I survive on that all summer long. And so I brought one of those, and some cookies to share. Please come back this evening for that, to kind of recount those, and stay afterwards at the Student Learning Center so we can kind of reminisce together. I think most of us have heard or remembered hearing some of the accounts of David in the Bible. Maybe it was him starting as a young small shepherd boy, taking down the mighty Goliath, still used in sports analogies today, the big against the strong, and the one that was not supposed to take the bigger one out, the David and Goliath story. Maybe that is the first story you remember from Bible class as being a small child, to remember that story. How he showed such great faith and did not back down from the confrontation whenever everyone else had. Maybe we remember David, who goes on later to be the king of Israel, replacing Saul, who was the first appointed king, stood head and shoulders above the rest. He did not, as we know that God does not look on the outward appearance of man, but looks at what we have to offer. And as the prophet went through all of Jesse's family to say, well, maybe this is the one, he seems to be the one. No, God passed, till they went through all of the brothers, and I think the prophet probably must have been miffed at one point to say, is there anyone else? Certainly, are we missing someone? Oh, well, they kind of discounted it. Yeah, it's that small David out in the field tending to sheep. Maybe that's how we remember that. He was very talented with song and dance as he danced before the Ark of the Covenant. We remember David from the great psalmist who wrote plenty of those things that we can recount, along with his son Solomon, about God that we still and read and recite to express our expression of God, whether it be at funerals or whether it be for encouragement. We also have heard about David's heart, who was a man after God's heart, as God testifies in 1 Samuel 13 and 14, why he tells Samuel the prophet why he selected him in the first place over the king of Israel. And referenced again in Acts 13 and 22. He raised up David to be their king, concerning whom he also testified and said, this is the account that we find in Acts. He's already said this. I have found David the son of Jesse, a man after my heart, who will do all my will. All of his will? Now wait a second. For those of us who read our Bible, And we stick to it very closely. Isn't this the same man who later is to be found out with another man's wife, who is caught in adultery with Bathsheba, where he even in this act conceives a child? He makes her pregnant. And he, being king and having all the power to literally have this man sent to the front line of battle to only assure that his plan would play out, that he certainly would die in action, and therefore leaving Bathsheba widowed and carrying David's child, all would work out. How can this be? And why is it that we can remember the exception sometimes, and in most cases, a lot of times, and nothing else? How then can he be described with such approval from God's point of view, where he is described as one who will do all his will? That's what it says. If we now go out and look at 1 Kings 15 and 5, which was read for us by Tommy, it says, because David did what was right in the sight of the Lord and had not turned aside from anything that he had commanded him all the days of his life, except in the case of Uriah the Hittite. Everything except this incident, which is not a small one, so easily swept under the rug, not even in 2014. Maybe that's where our error oftentimes comes from. Not only how we deal with others, but maybe even with ourselves. Some people have a hard time even forgiving themselves. God did not judge David on this one event to be in the oracles of all of his life, to have his whole life based on this horrible sin, and horrible indeed, no doubt. But sadly, oftentimes, that's exactly what we do. We do it to others. And maybe, as I said, even to ourselves, to even forgive ourselves. Now, instead, God looked at the whole person, the whole life, and he judged David as a whole. Some would say that God considered the whole totality or totalness of David's life, and not the exception. Now contrast that to how you and I live today. And someone may have their whole life summed up with an event that we hold or still hold against them. It doesn't matter what else they have done or possibly will do. For example, I'm going to show you that we do this all the time. When I give you the name O.J. Simpson, what do you think of? Do you think of the juice? Do you think of the great running back of old? I'm sure if you're a younger generation and did not hear that story, you do not think of O.J. Simpson as one of the greatest running backs of the NFL, scoring touchdowns for the Buffalo Bills. We've long since forgotten that. Maybe it was a short time he was an actor, just kind of thrown in some of those Leslie Nielsen films as kind of a joke. Or rather, do you and I mostly immediately think of Nicole Brown Simpson and the murder that took place of his wife? I must admit, I think of him as a murderer every time. I know he's in jail now for another incident. But you say O.J. Simpson, and I see the murder trial. I go right to, that is the O.J. Simpson that I know. How about Dr. Samuel Mudd? We have to kind of go back into our history to understand this story. To know him, that was the doctor who set the broken leg of John Wilkes Booth, the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. And because of that fact alone, all the doctoring, all the babies delivered, all the life saved before or then after, throw everything else out from present to future of individuals. It's where we get the expression that's used to describe someone who loses their good name. Well, your name is Mud. Based on that account. And even after being exonerated from the Lincoln conspiracy to plot to murder the president, it was too late, because the verdict of public opinion would never change the course of his family history, even for the rest of his life. And now his name, along with others that would be called Mud, nicknamed Mud, because of their reputation, is ruined. You get the idea. How many of us judge on the exception and throw everything out, regardless? Some can never get past a situation, even if asked to be forgiven or not. Look at even what happened to Pete Rose, one of the greatest baseball players who will not enter the Hall of Fame, and maybe not even in my lifetime, because of his discretions of betting on baseball in games of which he managed. I'm not going to argue the fact at all. The facts are, in public opinion, this is an open and closed case every year when the ballot comes up. Still this today has not recovered from what he now says was a mistake. But we have not forgotten. Sometimes someone may do something and may even do it to us, and we define their whole life based on that occurrence. I have heard stories told about some event that happened so long ago and may have even been dealt with, and has seen that person change, but never by the one offended. They certainly hold on to that offense like it's some kind of badge of honor for them, sadly. And since they were wounded by this event, they make it their own Purple Heart that they like to wear and show to everyone that will be their audience. Would we in turn want that to be about us? Was something that we may have done in our past? No, certainly not, as we come to a Sunday and we want more forgiveness and more mercy perhaps, but not wanting to issue any of it out. Be careful, because you'll be judged on that, because how you judge and your measures of judgment is how it will be brought back to you. So if you're harsh and not with fact-finding and nothing else, then that's exactly how you will be dealt with and dealt with in the end. I don't want it to downplay any of the hurts in our lives, especially like even in David's case. It could be a betrayal such as devastating as David's. Could be anything, really. Their whole life, their reputation, their character, all being subjected on the basis of the one thing. And I hope not for me, because there is some things in my life I want to not only be washed from, but that God sees my whole life just as he's expressed it of how he sees David's life. I think that you'd want the same thing. And he does. Thankfully, he does. For those who are walking and being faithful as he continues to cleanse us from all unrighteousness, as the passage goes. And if you think of what David did, that is something to be remembered, as we even still has remembered, and even in this First Kings, except for with Uriah the Hittite. No doubt something that we would hold on to. Think of that in the court of public opinion today. If something like that were to occur, some high-ranking official, if this is exactly what David played out, and we put it into today's role models of 2014, they wouldn't last one night on the nightly news and the talk shows that would follow after one night. We can go on. What about President Nixon? What word describes him? Is it crook? Is that how we'll ever see him? Always see him? And the social media that would follow was something such as the case with David, how long we would hold this against this person. David got to keep his throne. We'd want that person dethroned immediately, probably the rest of his life. We'd never let that person live it down. Would we be able to write about this man, David, the way God does? How many would trust him to serve in this congregation? As an elder, as a leader, as a minister, as even just one who attends and wants to be a part of the work here? How would we define him? As an adulterer and a murderer? Where God did not. It's not how he was defined. But we are just trying to help people by just stating the facts, as some have said. I am just speaking the truth, others have said. But let me add, not out of love either. And that's the whole intention. Oh, but we're only doing it because we want to help. We want to help warn everyone. As I can't wait to jump on the phone to warn everyone of something that was so badly done. And sure it was. not downplaying it again, caused much pain to him and his family and the nation of Israel. The family doesn't go back to warm and fuzzy if you read all the rest of the accounts of David and his sons and what happens to his family. And how many in a today's setting couldn't wait to sit down in a few minutes, recount the whole story to someone that may have never heard the story of David. As I sped through it as fast as I could, and I'm going to keep it lengthy. Most of you already know the story, but it is an unforgettable sin. But that's how sin takes you further than you ever wanted to go and makes you stay longer than you ever wanted to stay. And here he finds a woman that he desires as king and sees her bathing and has to have him for himself. So he, be the king, can authorize that. Summons her here, and he does. And he lays with her, and she becomes pregnant. Uh-oh, what do I do with this? I know her husband's a very loyal person in the army, and he's away on leave right now. Word we know here being in Lawton, Fort Sill. I'll get him to come away from leave, and I'll have him come, and he'll just pay a visit with his wife, and natural things will occur, and everybody will be miffed, and they will think that that's his child. Well, this loyal soldier who back down during those customs would not adhere to that because they were not to go home and have a conjugal visit as we would know. They were supposed to come home on leave but stay outside the city gates, not to go home and just kind of rekindle the old flame. So he didn't, and stayed outside the city square, as every honorable soldier would. And that must have frustrated David. So he says, plan B, plan A didn't work. So I know, I'll tell you what, I'll invite him up to the palace and I'll feed him with lots of food and lots of drink, and I'll get him drunk, and he won't have that great logic in his mind to be that loyal army. He'll just kind of do what's natural, and then he'll go home and do what I want him to do. And that plan backfired as well. So now it's a plan C. You see how far we get with this? To get out of the sin that I've created in my own life? So plan C was, I'm going to make sure that he is on the front lines of battle because I am king and there is a war raging on, and I'm not even a king that's leading by example. And most kings go off to war as he sat in his palace, had a lot of downtime, had a lot of freedom to look at a Bathsheba in the first place. Should have been a king out with his men. But nonetheless, fast forward to him finally getting caught by a prophet who has to tell him such a story that he wants to have this man taken care of in the hypothetical position of someone that only had one sacrifice, and he took away his only one when he had many. You want to say, who was that man? That man is you. It may be why it's so hard for us to forgive others when we find it hard to forgive others as we hold on to so many things the way we do, or even why so many find it hard to forgive even themselves. It's really a tactic of Satan to never let you forget, to never forget your discretions and your sins, to tell you that you don't add up. We don't, and we're not worthy. We are imperfect, which all of us are without Christ and his blood. And yet the Bible says through Christ and his blood, we would be washed white as snow, in good standing. Really, but this has been so crimson stained. How could it ever come clean again? Most would never try with such a stained garment. Most would look to throw it out and start over. Do we actually believe God when he says that he can forgive? He can forgive even the hardest and the most difficult of sins. Cast our sin in a sea of forgetfulness to be remembered or counted against us no more. Sometimes we are so much like Thomas, who would not really believe unless seen for themselves. I remember that's what happened to me when I first went to work for a professional cleaning service. I've told my boys this story before. It was called the wash line. There's 3 different levels, and they took care of regular uniforms, rugs, the stuff that you see in nursing homes with bed sheets, hospital gowns, hospital sheets. You can kind of see the mess that you could get in, especially coming from nursing homes and hospitals. Surgical gowns, stained in blood. And I was the rookie. I was a novice on the wash line coming in, and I saw this stack of laundry ready to go in the washer. Some were white sheets from hospitals and nursing homes. And I looked in my full skepticism at an age of 18 and says, they're never coming clean. There's no way. My mom works hard at getting stains out with grass stains and maybe a little blood that I've got, but this is over the top. They all looked at me and smiled and laughed. White sheets. Going in as I seen them go in. And after that cycle of 30 minutes, come out whiter than I've ever seen. Could not believe it. That there was a detergent out there. It wasn't Tide. It was the chemical stuff that was put in where we had to scoop out. You had to wear rubber gloves because it would immediately start to react to your skin, start to burn. So I don't know what kind of acid. I don't know what it is. It's magical because I've seen it. And that image portrays out about how blood and how it just looks so nasty and it's just point of no return, and yet can be washed as white as snow. Can we believe that's how God works in our lives? And you take Moses as the other example. How can he be overlooked? We talked a little bit about him and his sister this morning in class. Do you only remember Moses as a murderer? Because he was. You see, you probably don't. See, you can do this. Because we put Moses at the top. The Pharisees did that. But he was a murderer. Murdered the Egyptian. And then ran away for 40 years. But we don't hold that onto Moses. Moses was the 10 Commandment Moses. That was the special Moses, not the murderer. And then, 40 years go by, and I guess with time we tend to forget. A man who started out with privilege for the first 40 years, only after the murder, to run in hiding, only to become a nobody for the next 40 as he shepherds flocks, and at the age of 80 was used significantly by God to free the Israelite nation, as we know today, only to question and be questioned for another 40 years by all the murmurers and complainers, and then at the age of 120 gets a little out of I guess I'd get a little out of hand. We talked about that in class today. A temper with the people, lost his patience probably long ago, but showed long-suffering for the people time and time again as he put himself in front of God's wrath, as God asked Moses to, as he says, stand back. I'm going to wipe them out. I'm going to make you a great nation. And as I posed to the class today, I said I would probably take God up on that offer, really. When you look at all the murmuring that Moses had to go through, all the complainers, all the rest of that stuff, and if you're going to make me a great nation and you're going to wipe them out, well, let's get started. This is celebration day. He didn't. Now, how can I have a heart like Moses? But the one time God says to speak to the rock, and a 120-year-old man lets his kind of impatience and temper gets in the way, instead strikes the rock. Big deal? No big deal. Big deal to God. He wanted to show his people something. It was for God's glory, not Moses. And for his unbelief and not listening to God, so much in fact that he's not to enter the promised land, he begs God. He says, forgive me of this. He says, I know, I'll forgive you of this, but you're not going. And over again, he petitions God because, as we found out today in class today, he could speak face to face and he could speak clearly with him. He petitioned God on his sister's behalf after leprosy, and God's changed his mind on so many accounts. Well, maybe he'll do it with this and pleading to God and repetition. Finally, paraphrasing, God says, enough. I've heard your plea. You can go up on top of the mountain. You can go see the promised land, but you're not going in. You're not entering. I've made up my mind. Is that how we remember Moses? As the failure at the rock? The one not going and entering the promised land? Again, no. Why? Because Moses is bigger than all that. And so is our situation through God's forgiveness. And even though he does not lead the people personally in, as Moses wanted all of his life, isn't he the one that is mentioned in the Transfiguration next to Christ in Matthew 17, alongside Elijah? Now again in the New Testament, the Hebrew writer recounts his life in chapter 11, 23 through 29, this way. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw he was a beautiful child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he grew up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to endure ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. Considering the reproach of Christ greater than riches than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is unseen. By faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of the blood, so that he who destroyed the firstborn would not touch them. By faith they passed through the Red Sea as they were passing through the dry land, and the Egyptians, when they attempted it, were drowned. It's funny how we don't hold on to so much more about Moses, of his failures that we had mentioned, that the overall faith shone so bright overshadowed those events in his life. And the same can be said of others that we come in contact with, and even ourselves. God is not done with you or I. if we submit to him and want to remain faithful to him for the rest of our lives. And as long as it is said, by faith, Eric did and kept going. And by faith, you did and kept going. That's how God sees our whole life, the totality of it. Not all the exceptions that we want to tend to hold on to. And if we remain abiding and faithful to the end, well, the final assessment of our lives, when it will be proclaimed, all I want is not so much to hold on to the exception in people's lives and not make that the whole thing. Because we want grace and mercy. And he extends that to us. He just wants us to extend that to others. And look at people the way God looks at people, who love so much that he sent his son to die for each one of us. That he was willing to be sent while we were yet sinners, when we were crimson stained, and we were the exception. But now he is, and we are seen through him. If we can be of any service to you, we can pray with you and for you. Maybe you've never obeyed the gospel, and we want to have that opportunity given to you now that everything is ready and everything is prepared. Maybe you just need extra prayers of this congregation that are willing to pray with you and for you. Whatever your need is, if you have one, if you'll come know and make it known as we stand and as we sing.